Hey everyone, Night Haro here. So today I want to talk about a clip that someone sent me the other day that I thought was pretty interesting, and it's actually from Zynode. And I think that Zynode has a good point here. I don't think the point is necessarily the point he's trying to make, but I think there's a really good point. So let's take a look at it and we'll talk about it on the other side.
We call Zynode builds, right, combined with monster sets or a weapon set and two sets or whatever. You would have to test 160 billion possibilities out of all the possibilities that there could be, switching everything out from one piece to another, and etc, 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 to find out the results of all of them. And that's not including skills and shit. There is the exact number here. If you tried every possibility there is, and this is a real number, see if someone does know the number for this. There's 68 digits. So basically you say 15,000 billion, seven lots of billions. That's how many combinations there are. And if you tried every single one of them for once a second, based on update 40 alone, it would take you approximately 5,057 years to do it. So when someone goes, I found best, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about.
So I guess I should start off by saying that like the math done here is pretty questionable. If you want to make a big number, and then yeah, maybe somehow that works out. The thing is that, and what most really all in-game players know, is that most of the sets, like 90 to like 99% of the sets in the game, are just not good. And you know, the thing is that with like all those permutations, like you don't need to go through all of those, right? Like you can, if you know what you're trying to build towards, you can try to build towards that, and you can eliminate most of the options. Like again, 90% plus of the options, both of sets and also various skills and stuff like that, just by like looking at them. And then you don't need to permute, like use this skill that you know isn't good with everything else to see if somehow it becomes magically better, right? If there's no reason to do that. But the thing that I do agree on, and I think the point that actually could be made from this that is extremely valid, is that, you know, and I hear this all the time, it's like, oh, just go make your own build, just go do whatever. Oh, you don't need to listen to a guide, just go do whatever. Well, there really are that many permutations. And if you don't know that most of the sets in the game aren't good, and if you can't just look at them and immediately go, oh, this set is just a worse, some sets in the game are literally just worse versions of other sets in the game. It's like, oh, this is kind of like this one, it's just worse, right? So you don't need to check that out. You don't need to look at that set. And there's plenty of tricks, you know, some sets say, oh, it gives it to this kind of damage. And you don't really understand that magic damage isn't just all damage done with what you would assume are magical abilities. No, magic damage is a specific kind of damage. So if you create an ice wall, you would think that, oh man, that has to be magic, right? Well, no, that's not magic damage. That is an ice damage. And so my point is that if you don't know any of those things, then there really are that many permutations you would have to try. And it's a nearly impossible task. And you might end up with something okay. I think there are some general tips and rules and things like that. And to someone like me who does this all the time, I don't find it that difficult, but I don't find it that difficult because I've spent hours and hours and hours looking at all this stuff, analyzing it, trying stuff out, and I have a bunch of knowledge. I have this huge knowledge base. And so when people say, oh, just go make your own build, I think that's horrible advice. You're basically telling someone to go try out all these, you know, many permutations. It's much better to figure out like, hey, what are some good builds? What are people doing? And then kind of go from there. Now, if you want to try everything from scratch and relearn everything, that's a great way to learn. You'll have a really good in-depth knowledge. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but I don't think it's good advice to the average person that only has a couple of hours a week to play the game or to play any game. And so for them, it makes a lot of sense to go just grab a build. Hey, show me something that's pretty good. And then the other thing is, you know, talking about meta and what's best. If Zynode or anybody else has something that's better, show us. And that's what the entire in-game community is about. If you have something that's better, show me. And if it looks better, cool. Then let's all start doing that instead. And that's what it is. It's a collection of people that are all trying to be like, hey, how can we do this better? Oh, let me try this. You know, there's this misconception that in-game players don't try things and that they're just, oh, just do this. The real hardcore in-game players are constantly trying all kinds of things. Now, what happens is that there'll be some people that come along and they learn what is meta, and then they start yelling yelling at other people about why they're not using meta and they're stupid for not using meta. Those are not the serious hardcore in-game players. The hardcore in-game players, if you suggest something to them, they can tell you why it's not good. Now, it does become a bit taxing because most things, as Zynote has just pointed out, most things are not good. Most things are garbage. And so it does become a little exhausting, and some of it is non-intuitive and doesn't, sets don't work the way they're supposed to or the way they sound like they're supposed to. And I literally mean like they don't work the way that they're supposed to. There are broken sets in the game. I'm not going to mention some of them because some of them we use because they're really good and they're supposed to do one thing and they don't do it, but they do another thing really well. So that's the secret sauce of in-game. And I'm not going to mention it because I don't want Zoss to fix it, quote unquote, fix it. But, there's all these things that go into it. And, it does get a bit exhausting to try to have to explain to someone for the 50th time, hey, why this won't work the way you think it will work and why this one set isn't good. And you'll see people and you'll be like, oh yeah, I thought that set was good too. And I tried it out and turns out it's not. Turns out it doesn't work because of this. And whatever. My point is that there's a bunch of options and that the real hardcore in-game players, we are constantly trying stuff out. I mean, that's how I came up with my Brittleton build, right? I'm using only one 5-piece set. I've got 2 arena weapons, and it does just as good of damage. Now, I tried out a bunch of things that didn't work, and the only reason I tried that out is because that's the build I wanted to make. I wanted to make that build, but I wanted it to be good as an optimal setup, or at least almost as good. And it took a lot of work, and I eventually figured something out, and it worked really well. Expecting someone who only has 2 hours a week to go out and do that same thing is crazy, and it's horrible advice for them. So, and I don't blame anybody who says it. I think the people that say that, also to understand where they're coming from, they're like, hey, it's not that big of a deal. You don't need to be that sweaty. You can just have fun with it and whatever else. And I absolutely agree with that. And again, I think most in-game players would absolutely agree with that. Go do whatever, have fun, whatever. But if you're going to come into some group content and you're going to try to do some really hard content, something that's really challenging and really difficult, you need to come with something that makes sense to have in there. And the best and easiest way to do that is to just copy what somebody else has already figured out is really good. If you want to go figure out your own thing, absolutely go do that. But don't show up with something that's horrible and when you haven't put in all that work and you haven't tried all the different permutations out, and then just expect everybody else who is using much better setups to carry you through the content. And that's where a lot of the conflict comes in. And I'll note this is why some in-gamers, myself included, really don't like some content creators because they don't put in any work. They just make something up and they tell people how amazing and insane it is and how unkillable it'll make you when it won't do any of those things. And it's not optimal. If they were going for survivability, you could make it more survivable. If you were going for DPS, you could make it do more DPS. And so it's just like this build could be improved just in general without losing anything. But they suggest these builds to people and they tell them that it can do any content in the game. And then they show up for group content where everybody is working together towards a goal with this build that's really bad. And they don't know that. They've been lied to. They've been told that this build is really good and that, you can do whatever you want and that's totally fine. And then they show up to group content and they have mostly tanking and healing skills on their DPS. And they think this is a good thing because they've been told this is a good thing. When in reality, if you're showing up as a DPS, your job is to do DPS, not to be a tank, not to be a healer. You have one role and you fit in with the team and that's the job you're supposed to do. If this were football or soccer, if you're in the US and your goalie is trying to score goals, right? Their job is to defend the goal, not to try to score goals, And if they're out there like, oh yeah, I got a goal. And you're like, yeah, but we're down 4 points because you weren't where you were supposed to be, and you weren't doing your job. It's a team. We all have to work together. And they don't really understand that. And it's not their fault. I just want to make that very clear. They might get kicked from the group, or at the best situation, they get carried through, right? And then it reinforces that this build is good because they make it through group content, not realizing that it's everybody else in the group. The group could do it without them. They just happen to be in the group as well, and they're not really contributing. And if you're new and you're a beginning player, no one expects you to know all this stuff. No one expects you to do a great job. We all get carried. I've been carried. Everybody's been carried at some point, which means that the rest of the group is really doing all the work and you're just kind of along along for the ride. That's how things work. But that's where the frustration with content creators who professionally, they make money. This is how they make their living, and they've never bothered to learn how the game works well enough to give good advice to their community. So they actively harm the people that are watching their videos and looking at their guides and stuff like that. And so I think that's where you see a lot of the frustration with some of these content creators and why they get such a bad reputation, because they're constantly giving bad advice to people, which causes conflict in the game and causes them to exclude themselves or to be excluded from content that they could join in. And I've just seen it so many times, and I hate to see it. So anyways, I just thought it was a really interesting point, not necessarily the one that he was trying to make. So I just wanted to talk about it briefly. Hope you guys have a great day, and we'll catch you in the next one.